Cool. I'll go back to sharing now. All right, so let's start off a little bit of WordPress news and events. It's kind of light this time of year, but if you haven't seen, I guess the big one, so WordPress 5.9 was released. We talked about that quite a bit in our last one of our last meetups, but 5.9.1, a point release, just got released last week. Primarily bug fixes from, I didn't dig through all the release notes, but again, I think especially a 0.1 release, you want to make sure your site's updated to it. These days, a lot of sites automatically update, and the fixes were done to WordPress core and the block editor. So if you haven't seen that yet, if you haven't looked at your site back in a while, you may want to take a peek, make sure that you get updated to 5.9.1. So far, Peter, if you had any different experience, but everything I've had, everything seems to have gone fine, both with 5.9 and the point release.
Yeah, everything's been fine except for one thing that was kind of curious because it ties into the stuff that we do when we're using Kadence, I believe. Yeah, it was Kadence, in that the preview windows of all things in the mobile sections broke. Mm-hmm. So that was on the back end, nothing on the front end of the site. Everything worked fine. But when editing in Kadence and you went into the mobile preview,
is that with the point release, or was that with 5.9?
That was 5.9, and it wasn't the point release. Kadence had to do an update.
Oh, okay,
which they did. It came within the week, I think.
Yeah. So this was like the big, I guess, in terms of WordPress release things, most recent. And then just other quick news. If folks aren't aware of this online festival coming up, and I think Peter, you'd told me about this one last year or the year before. WordFest 2022. This one's pretty unique. So this is starting on Friday. It's multiple time zones. It's one of these all-day virtual events, over 60 sessions. And again, I think it's unique from any other like WordCamps that I've seen before, because a lot of the sessions are really about what we're doing here, remote work. It's within WordPress, the context, but also mental health and mental well-being. So a lot of interesting sessions and speakers there. It's sponsored by, or they're trying to raise awareness for Big Orange Hearts, a nonprofit organization that I think also has these mental health as one of its focus. It's free to attend, but when you do sign up, they ask you if you want to do a donation, and again, it's for a good cause, for a nonprofit. So do a search for it, WordFest, and again, wordfest.live is the link to that. So that's starting up on Friday. And then tools or tips, the plugin spotlight. So,
all right, so I'm going to grab the screen just for a second.
Yep.
Right, let me pull this up. All righty, so because we're talking mobile today, what I thought I would share with you is a QR code maker that I think is pretty cool. QR codes are, there's WordPress, I was making sure you were covering that. QR codes are, you point your phone at it. Now, it used to be you had to have an app and all that kind of stuff, and I thought QR codes didn't work all that great in my opinion. But now that I can just open up my camera, point, and my phone knows, oh, you're looking at a QR code, would you like to open up the website on your phone? So QR Code Monkey, I think, is a really nice tool if you wanted to generate QR codes. Why might you want to do that? If you want to put it on a flyer, on a business card, that type of thing. But you could also even just put it on. I see people actually using it on their websites when somebody's calling up something. Instead of typing something in, you can use the QR code. And so, for example, if we wanted to take our build site, I'm going to copy this URL, pop it into here under the URL. I'm going to paste that right there, and I can create my QR code. Now, if I point my phone, or if we point our phones at this QR code, you'll go, your phone will say, hey, you want to open up in a browser. What's also really neat about QR Code Monkey is that you can set colors. You could do, I'll scroll down, and you could do designs if you wanted to. You could say, hey, this is my Twitter feed, so on and so forth. So it really is kind of interesting. But since we're talking mobile, I thought talking a quick intro on QR code and using qrcode-monkey.com I found to be a really neat site for generating codes.
That's cool. Yeah, I've used Canva to build those. Yeah, I didn't realize the site was there. As Celia mentioned, if you saw the Super Bowl commercial with the QR code, like it was one. It was like one of the VCR things with QR codes just bouncing around.
That's right, yeah.
Like
But
a minute or two. It was
QR
like,
codes could be used really horribly too. If you're driving down the highway and there's a QR code on a billboard, I'm like, but
the amount of
but
money they paid for that Super Bowl commercial, I think it was for like, was it like Bitcoin or something? It was some cryptocurrency, because that's all that was on the Super Bowl commercial.
Well, we generated a QR code for an organization that I work with, and the reason being is that it's outreach to people in underserved areas, and they don't have computers for the most part, but they do have smartphones. So the idea of having a flyer that then has a QR code where it'll go into to get more information is a nice kind of easy way to get people to find what you're looking for. So there's a very practical use of the QR code.
Cool, very neat. Great, we'll share that link, or put it in the chat if you don't mind, Peter, if people are here.
Good.
All right, so let's dive into our main topic this evening, which is how to make your website mobile friendly. Kind of a broad topic, but again, I think one of interest to everyone. So again, let's go over just quick agenda. We'll start with the introductions of Peter and myself. If you're here for the first time, we'll introduce ourselves, and we'll go over a couple of broad things just to set some context. So what term you'll hear quite often is about responsive. So what is a responsive website? And then how do you measure your website? We'll talk about some ways to do that. And then how to test your website on multiple devices, because that's kind of a challenge if you're working on a desktop. How do you see what it looks like on different devices? I'll touch upon some things to avoid for mobile devices, and then we'll show you some hands-on things, or a combination of slides and hands-on. So some common things that you're very likely to need to adjust for mobile. And then I'll get into some of the more advanced things, and there's actually advanced beyond this, which we won't touch upon, but I'll just show you some things to give you a little more finer grain control if you need it. And like I said, we'll wrap things up at the end. So real quick about myself, I'm Ray, one of the co-organizers of the Hartford WordPress meetup group. I've been a software developer / architect in IT for around 25-ish years. Worked for a lot of large enterprise organizations. Been using WordPress to build websites for around 5+ years. I think I updated that recently. I'm self-employed now as a website developer. I live in Newington, Connecticut, married, no kids, one crazy old cat, and I'm a geek. That's me. Peter. And
I'm Peter Ingersoll. I live in South Windsor, Connecticut. I'm married with 2 adult children. I've been working in digital marketing and moved into web development way back when, literally at the beginning. Been working with WordPress for about 10 years now, but as a builder, designer, and maintainer, much less a developer. I'm not a coder. I'm self-taught in a lot of things, and along with those in our family, we've got 2 cats that may jump up on the screen every once in a while. So
keep things exciting. So real quick recap for folks who've been attending our sessions for the past, at least, we're probably going up almost a year on this project. So tonight's presentation, even though it's not specifically related to our project, I just want you to know that we are trying to do it in context of the project. So probably about maybe almost a year ago now, what we started doing was this idea of let's build a site from scratch and something moderately complex using WordPress. We wanted to use just free plugins when needed, and we've been building upon that from meetup to meetup with some breaks in between. But if you go back to our YouTube channel, actually you'll find the very beginning of us building out the site, and we wanted to show best practices and not just quick and dirty solutions. So and do things hands-on as much as possible. So again, tonight's kind of an extension of that. We've reached a point on the site where we're not just building out content, now we're doing tweaks like tonight's doing a mobile adjustments. So if you're interested in the project itself, we're building a website for a fictional nonprofit animal rescue. And again, it has the typical goals you would think of for an animal rescue. So even though we've been doing things for this very specific nonprofit, everything we're showing, like tonight, for example, applies to any type of website. So if you want to go back and, like I said, watch the previous ones, I think you'll get a lot out of it, even if you're not building an animal rescue website. That's kind of what the site's starting to look like now. So this was, Peter and I talked about the topic for this month. We reached a good point where, our previous builds, we didn't concentrate so much on things like mobile. But now we figured this would be a good time to take a pause, and tonight's topic really, I think, reflects what we need to do on the website next. All right, so let's talk a bit about when we say mobile. This term you may hear quite often is responsive. So what's a responsive website? And I guess I'd kind of start with, sometimes, especially years ago or even today, some people might say, well, why should I care? Why do I care about adjusting anything on my site for mobile? Well, again, unless you've been sleeping under a rock, but people are using different devices now. It's not just desktops, it's everything, cell phones, tablets, everything else you can think of under the sun. Everything's smart now, smart TVs, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then mobile traffic itself, specifically mobile traffic, for a while there, it was, if you look at this trend on the slides here, I forget how far back this goes, to 2011, desktop, which is the, desktop is the purplish one, I guess, in here, was the predominant device that people are using to surf the web. And it really has flipped over now, where at least 55% of traffic worldwide is from mobile devices. So you can see, and again, this changes all the time, but it's around 55% of worldwide traffic is mobile, desktops around 43, and tablet really hasn't gone too far. I mean, I love my iPad, but tablet's been pretty static, around 2%-ish, I think, worldwide, and that's kind of what I see on sites that I monitor. So that's why you should care, because people are using mobile more. And again, from a user perspective, people expect a good experience on mobile. If you think back to not that many years ago, a lot of times you'd be lucky to find a mobile version of a site. People used to code like M. You can still find it for YouTube. I think there's still a mobile version of YouTube. So a lot of mobile sites in the past were really clunky, not really well thought out. These days, people expect a good experience, or as good of an experience on mobile as they do on desktop. And this is really especially important if you're doing a site that, let's say, e-commerce, for example. You lose visitors. If your site looks terrible, they're going to go to the next person. So again, lost visitors equals lost revenue. And then on top of that, Google, as we all know, and everyone wants to get ranked properly by Google, Google uses mobile friendliness as one of their ranking factors. And this goes back several years ago. And it hasn't changed. So, that was something they communicated back in 2015, that mobile friendliness was a ranking signal. Again, they don't disclose everything that are ranking factors, so we don't know exactly what proportion this has to do with ranking, but it certainly is important, because that's the future. I don't know, Peter, do you want to jump in for any of these, or you feel free to?
I'm going to cover a little bit more on what you just described, sure. But I think there's one of the key things from what you just mentioned about what was a mobile site is that there are still legacy sites and sites that actually have a separate mobile site. And that is actually now a negative in terms of Google. They really want your mobile site and your main website to be the same website, as opposed to some different version of the site, so that their index works for everybody, but knowing that it's the mobile first that gets indexed. But I think that's not all that understood, because years ago, especially if you're in corporate, you were building your mobile site just as you described, and yeah, not a good plan right now.
I mean, the only other trend, and this is probably a whole, I don't want to open this can of worms too, a trend that seems like it's also settled down a bit was everyone was building apps for their businesses, like, oh, let's build an app for this, let's build an app for everything. And I think after a while, especially as HTML5 got more powerful, and that's been at least a few years now, I think people realized, hey, not everyone wants another 500 apps on their phone, and not every app is something that's useful. If the app is just basically a link to your website, what's the point? And again, building apps means you're not going to be indexed by Google, and that's how most people these days, people think of Google basically as the front end to the internet. So again, I think that's one of the reasons mobile has gotten more important over the years. So when we talk responsive, what's a responsive website? Well, it's kind of a nebulous term because responsive it's an approach. It's an approach to web design. So just again, for people who haven't been doing websites for a while, back in the day, you think about that, the process of web design was very much that you'd have a designer building a website in a tool like Adobe, or Photoshop, some sort of graphic design tool. And they would get the layouts set up perfectly for how they wanted to display on the screen, and it would be handed off to a developer who then would go code it and try to match things, almost pixel perfect layout to what the designer came up with. Well, as devices have changed, you don't really know what kind of screen layout or device size your page is going to display on. So it's completely upended the old flow of how sites were built. So responsive is really, like I said, it's more of an approach/philosophy to web design, where you want to have the same web content, but you want it to adapt or be responsive to different screen sizes and window sizes. So again, if you think about like WordPress, for example, WordPress is kind of built from the core to support this, in that there is already a separation in WordPress between your content, like your posts and pages, and then your layouts, which is again, if you think about a theme, that's what a lot of the theme is doing, is those are your templates, and then the display, and that's CSS, that's your styling. So there's no magic to this. Like I said, all the pieces have always been there, but it's more of a philosophy behind it. And the real magic, if you will, is CSS, those cascading style sheets. That's really where you or your theme can control how a layout displays differently on different devices.
Yeah, Ray, you touched on something really important there for those who've built websites for customers or in an office, this idea of a picture perfect site. And to this day, there's still effort that goes into that can go into explaining that having a flexible, responsive design that adapts to whatever it's in is far more valuable than having everything match a brochure, for example.
Right.
So yeah, there's still plenty of folks who want a pixel perfect display, and it's nice when you don't have to worry about that. You just have to worry about works everywhere.
So again, when we're talking about this in the context of WordPress, in the past few years or so, I'm trying to think like when, if you'd go to Theme Forest or WordPress repository itself, a lot of themes were really touting the fact that they're responsive by me, I'm a responsive theme. Well, it's one of those things like you get used to it now, like your car has, airbags and things. Nobody's saying I've got airbags. Like, of course you have airbags now. So most modern WordPress themes are responsive. I mean, you can find old ones in the repository, or you may be supporting, I feel sorry for you if you're supporting a site that maybe wasn't a responsive theme, because that's going to be a real pain in the neck. But by default these days, most people expect WordPress themes to be responsive. I think what varies though, if you're picking between responsive themes, or if you're really interested in mobile, I would say is the level of customization supported by the theme. So what I mean by that, at least, was themes that have a high level of customization, they really make it very easy for you within the theme settings, or let's say you're using like Elementor or Divi within the page builder itself. They really give you access to mobile settings very quickly and very easily. So some examples, these are just a few, Astra, Kadence, which we're using for our demo site, Divi, Elementor, etc., Beaver Builder, all of those really do expose mobile settings pretty easily. But you do still run into sites, and sadly, the WordPress site, the default 2022, 2021, I would say that they're probably more limited customization. They are responsive. I mean, the themes are set up in such ways that there are some responsive rules built in there, and we'll talk more detail about what that means. But when you want to get into some fine-grained manipulation for mobile, most of those themes are still, you have to go and write your own CSS, whether it's in a child theme or the customizer. So I'd say there's probably a varying degree of customization is probably more of the differing factor, as opposed to whether something is responsive or not. Peter, any thoughts on that too?
And well, I always, of course, I'm going to always say generate press too as a theme. I like that as a good framework theme. But we still do run into plenty of themes out there that are not mobile responsive. You put it on a phone and it shoots all the way to the right, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. But there's also the design, not so much in WordPress for those, but you will still find websites out there that were put together based on building a table, where you're locking everything into the table, and they still exist. So when we come across those, we'd like to let the owners know that it doesn't work on a phone very well. So
yeah. Or custom. I mean, again, I tend to unfortunately work on quite a few sites that were built back in the old days, and they're still working. So the clients want to keep them running, but they're custom built themes, and let's say they haven't exactly evolved with the times quite well. So I see quite a few of those. So again, I guess the takeaway from this is responsiveness is an approach to web design. And then, like I said, most modern WordPress themes are responsive by default. It's just varying degrees of what you can do with them. So let's talk about now, jump into either your website. How do you measure your website? How does it behave on mobile? And again, it's kind of a broad measuring thing. So Peter, I think these are yours.
Yeah, I'll take over. I'll grab the screen too, so that I can swap some things in. So some of this we talked about already, but in terms of, again, I think it's important to keep coming back to what this all means, why it's valuable, and search engine optimization is something that everybody is very keen to. But one of the key things, okay, Google taking your website and presenting it as a top site to visit. How does mobile affect that? And mobile first indexing is really important. So Google is now crawling the mobile vision of your site first. I put that in quotes just because this is all robots all the time kind of thing. But in terms of, where there's a focus, that mobile first, it's actually backed off a little bit, because again, the goal being that we have responsive sites that work on all tools, but they're definitely making sure that does your site work on a mobile platform, because they're always looking for the sites that give the best user experience. If you're on the phone and you do a search and a site takes 20 seconds to load and it's got giant images and it doesn't fit, it's not a good user experience. So that mobile first indexing will affect you, because Google will say, not a good result, we're not going to rank you particularly high. So that mobile ready responsiveness is a ranking factor. That indexing algorithm for search engine optimization is complicated and ever evolving. But the thing I said way back when to now, if you follow the rules, just keep in mind, is it a good user experience and delivering good content? And right now, taking in the fact that, and most people are, a significant number of people, half your numbers from before, Ray, are looking at content on a phone. And just think about your own experience. You could see how that matters. Now, when we get into testing tools, which we're going to talk a little bit about, automated testing tools try to programmatically look at that user experience and user experience issues. So that's kind of one of the factors that goes into what do you want to look at that tells you kind of how Google sees your site. But ultimately, more importantly, is looking at the site. So here's some things to look at. The page speed insights, core web vitals, we've talked about it a little bit. Mobile friendly testing, which is a link, and I'll show some of these. Reports from Google Chrome, very strong right now. The developer tools that are being built into your browsers, and that's all the Chrome browsers, and Safari now includes this too. So it's Chrome, it's Firefox, it's Edge, and Safari have built-in tools where you can really kind of test your site, look at it. And then if you are, and we're not going to spend time going into this because this is its own thing. If you have Google Analytics and you set up your Google Search Console, then sometimes you'll get those emails from the Search Console saying, hey, we indexed a page and it doesn't look like it's mobile friendly. You'll get warnings like that, and you'll get alerts and all, because the Search Console is always trying to help you kind of have that best site. So on top of those testing tools, testing what people see it for yourself. It's really interesting to me how many times I find out that a company has not looked at their own website on a phone, or on a iPad, but more importantly on a phone. Corporate websites, you just want to say it doesn't work on the device that half of your people are looking at. So look at this at your site on your phone, and look at your site on other phones, because different phones are different sizes, different browsers may read your page slightly differently. A simple one, resize the browser window. And that's kind of the whole idea of responsive it's not only to a specific size, but it's to a window size that can change and have the variations in between. So as simple as that sounds, just resizing your browser window will give you a good idea of how your site is working. The browser inspect tool, I'll show you that, where you can kind of look at some things, look at your site right in your browser as if you were on a phone. There are extensions, which will give a quick one. Ray and I both use Hoverify, which gives us a quick view. There's another free extension called Responsive Viewer that gives you different views. And then within the WordPress editor itself is supported by the theme, and like Kadence does give us previews in all. So we'll spend, let me show you a couple of these things. So let's take a look at our site here. Now this is a site that I'm going to show, first of all, that simple test of resize the window. Now I've looked at this on a phone, but when I resize the window, it's giving me an idea of what that mobile experience would be. And we can already start seeing, what might we want to change in this site. But something that's really neat is if you go to your inspect. So if I click, it's the developer tools up in the, so I've got the inspect. Normally you can tell I was already looking at this, but you'll see your site and the code behind it and all that kind of stuff that's scary to most people to look at. But on the top right, when you open this in, or it could be at the bottom, depending if you have your code showing on the right or showing at the bottom of the screen, you have the icon. This is a little toggle for viewing your site as different devices. So when you click that, now we're looking as if we were on a device, and this tells us up here. So you can see that all the different devices that I can look at. So I can look at this and a iPhone 12 Pro. What does it look like? And we're looking at our site. And what's interesting about this too is that, see that my cursor is now gray. This is as if that's my finger. When I click, it's as if I touch. So you can see things like, you've used a hover effect on your website, but it doesn't work on a phone because you don't have a hover. You're either tapping or you're not tapping. So this is nice because it shows you how things work, and you can come in here and you can change it to different devices. A lot of them are pretty close. You can even, if you wanted to get to such a level where you can go to edit and add all kinds of devices and things like that. But clearly, the idea is once you get to a certain point of seeing what your website looks like on a mobile device, you get an idea. And now moving minuscule numbers of pixels one way or another isn't as important as being able to do this. But this is built right into your browser using that using this little mobile toggle up here. So that's a cool tool. What else did we have? We had resize browser, the toggle, the Chrome extension. So if I close this is what I was showing, and I had this site open and I went to, we have Hoverify. This is quick. And in Hoverify, it has this preview, and now it's showing me on different devices. So I can actually, see my site on different devices kind of all at once. So it's a neat way. And what sometimes I'll do is I'll come over here, and when I make changes to the site, I'll just refresh this page and it'll show me what my site now looks like on these different devices. So that's one way. Again, there's the revealer, which one, responsive viewer, is another type of that. So there's a bunch of ways to do this. But you don't have to do an extension if you go into to your inspector and look at that mobile device. And of course, what I was saying before, in terms of when you're editing a page, This is where your preview up here, tablet, this is in Kadence now. Theme, there's a lot to do with what's specific to a theme. But looking at it, you know, on a mobile device, looking at it on a tablet, looking at it at a desktop, that gives you, you know, the opportunity to see, and depending on the theme, even edit specific to those devices, which is pretty useful. And then the only other thing I wanted to show and not forget are some of these testing sites. So real quick, we go to, this is the page speed insights. So page speed insights, I'm going to go and I'm going to grab our poor site is getting beat up. And if we analyze that site, you can see when page speed insights, the link is in our slides. We'll make sure we have them, pagespeed.web.dev. It's showing that there is, you know, we're going to give you results for mobile and for desktop. They've added some new things. I think this is relatively new, this idea of, excuse me, data that's been collected if your site has a certain level of popularity, ours does not. But as we're looking at a highlighted mobile, it's giving a preview, it's giving us an idea of the performance, what are some of the issues that we might find, the first contentful paint, which is, you know, when that image first pops up, when you can interact. Our site comes up in 2.8 seconds, pretty straightforward. At least in this, we could redo this, reload this and find slightly different numbers. But that idea of, like, what if you had something that was really slow? Maybe you're loading big images, or you have a lot of stuff that's meant to make your site look fancy that a phone doesn't like very much. But you also can, of course, see it on a desktop and get your desktop performance. Our desktop performance is much faster. And because I didn't want to forget, they also take into account connection speed over phones. And in fact, that's a variable too. So the assumption is that on desktop, you're going to be on a faster connection than your phone might be. So that's Core Web Vitals. And then the only other one that we need to cover right now, real quick, the mobile friendly test, pretty simple. I'm not even sure how much, I haven't used this in a while. Ray, do you use mobile friendly testing?
No, because I think that other one is a bit better.
That other one tells you much more than you need. This kind of gives you a quick view, and again, with the effort of trying to say, how does a computer see our site versus the human, right? That's where these tools come in handy, because you don't want to miss anything that all of a sudden Google is seeing something that you say, hey, look great to me, but Google may find something that's an issue. They're telling us the page is in fact mobile friendly, showing us, you know, here's what we found, and so on. So those are the tools. Ray, are there any others that I might have missed or that you use?
No, I mean, I think, like I said, in terms of visualizing, that's key. And I think a lot of the tools that you touched upon are the same ones I use. I think the thing that can be daunting to people is there's so many devices. I mean, that was the why do people not do this? It's not because they don't want to, it's because it's difficult. Like, who knows what people are using? I'll talk about that in a second, about the measuring piece. But, you know, it's more of go for the common configurations, go for the common devices. I've learned, because again, I'm doing this professionally, just like Peter, go for the device of the client. So
yes,
if they're using the iPhone 6,
yeah,
that's the one you want to test on. They're using it in landscape mode. You're like, sure, I'll test it in landscape mode, make sure it looks good. But that's the thing you want to understand. You know, what are the common devices? So actually, that's probably a good segue. Let me just grab this back. So Peter covered this. So yeah, so in terms of, but visualization is key, like you said. I mean, again, nothing beats also, I mean, quick and dirty, you know, break out your favorite device and bring it up. Because a lot of things too is a lot of these are approximations of, you know, especially when Peter showed what's built into WordPress or the theme. To me, that's probably, take that with a grain of salt. That's probably the least precise one, because that's just generic. It's mobile. What does that mean these days? You know, if you have a big fat iPhone or a phablet or something versus an old school one. So that's trying to approximate it. But then again, so in addition, you know, if you have a live website, and hopefully you have Google Analytics installed, if you don't, go back to one of our previous presentations about how to do that. You have the ability to track mobile versus desktop website visitors. And there's some really interesting insights you can gain from this. The way to do it, again, if you're not really familiar with Google Analytics, is you search under, there's on the left-hand side, there's kind of a sidebar in Analytics. I won't bring it up. You go to Audience and Mobile, or the home or the dashboard with Analytics will show you these really nice charts too. But a thing to keep in mind is different types of websites can have very different breakdowns of mobile versus desktop. As we talked earlier about people are going mobile, that's true for the most part, but there are still some sites where I think you'll see some interesting reversals. So for example, these are two live sites that I support. One's a real cat shelter, where you can see it's like 61% of visitors are on mobile devices. And again, tablets, 3.2%, desktops around 35%. But the other one I support is the genealogy, website. Most people doing genealogy stuff are doing it on a desktop because they're searching records, they're doing database searches, et cetera. So, and the demographic is slightly older than some of the other ones too. So you'll have things flipped around. In that case, it's almost 65%, 64% are using desktop. Very few people are using mobile. And that one actually has a higher tablet one than I tend to see on others. So again, it's kind of know your audience, know your visitors, and you can get a lot of data directly from Google around who's coming to your site and what devices are they using. If you really want to drill down, I mean, you can get this further breakdown under that mobile settings around specifics around device types. And again, I take some of this with a grain of salt because a lot of people are using different tracking blockers and things like that. But for the most part, this gives you a good, I'd say, a good rule of thumb approximation of who's coming to your site. So I mean, you can get down to a level of, iPhones, iPads, Google, Samsung, et cetera, et cetera. And again, why could this be important? Maybe not the specific mobile device, although that comes up sometimes in conversations. Again, I said that client who's using the iPhone 6, I say, hey, you're the only one. This is just you. No one else is using the iPhone 6. Everyone's moved on. But a really important thing in these kind of level of detail is, especially for an e-commerce site, tracking conversions or other goals you may have. Let's say signups to a mailing list or something. You can track that by device type, maybe not Samsung versus Nexus, whatever, but by desktop versus mobile, because you may find some very interesting trends if you set up your goals correctly in Google. Like maybe you're losing mobile visitors, in a shopping cart experience, because maybe your shopping cart isn't sized properly for mobile. People are dropping, or you're getting a lot of page drops instead of, session drops for people going on mobile devices because your pages aren't formatted properly. So again, a lot of stuff there, well beyond the scope of what we're talking here, but just so you're aware of it too, that again, tracking, you don't have to just guess at those numbers of mobile visitors. There are things in analytics built in to track that for you. Okay, so that's measuring, that's kind of testing. Again, I'll pause for a second too. Any questions on the stuff that we've covered now? We've done a lot of slides, so I'd like to take a slide break for a second. Any other tools that people use? So you always got great suggestions. Any other tools you use for testing or seeing what your pages look like on mobile devices?
You did share how big is my browser.com as a way of getting an idea.
Yeah, that's a good one, because one thing I run into quite a bit too, because I'm always messing around with my browser size, is sometimes you don't really know how to resize things, or I want to get something back to a standard size. So I just have a Chrome extension that basically lets me resize my browser window. So I can say, hey, show me what it looks like on a regular laptop or desktop, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's another thing too. You want to know the size of your screen. Just we'll talk about a little bit later why you may want to know that for certain things.
Ray, one of the reasons I use how big is my browser is I can slide the screen wider and narrower and find out exactly when the menu breaks to set the mobile switch.
Right.
So, it might be safe, but I like to switch right when it breaks. It's my reason for using it.
Right. No, that's great. Exactly. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later about, when you need to get more accurate, more precise, you do need to know kind of those areas, like how big is my screen, and then when do I want certain things to happen. So perfect. All right, well, let's continue on. Let's talk a bit about, and these aren't all the things to avoid. There's many things to avoid for mobile devices. In some cases, the things you want to avoid for mobile are the things you want to avoid for desktop. So we won't cover the obvious things like security and all that kind of stuff. So that applies to everybody. But here's some that are a little bit more specific when you're designing a website for mobile devices. One we've already seen, Peter kind of showed that in action, is the site navigation. So things like the menus. Again, you think about if you go to a site that has a really complicated menu structure, nested, levels and submenus, et cetera, you want to test that out on a mobile device to make sure that it's both easy to navigate, easy to understand, and not just menus. I think about just how people navigate your site in general. If you need a lot of back buttons and things like that, that's a pain in mobile. So you want to make sure that you have a pretty clear and uncomplicated site navigation and test it out. Again, all these things it's only as good as what you see through testing. Pop-ups. Pop-ups are another one too that, again, many of us hate pop-ups, but we know that they're effective. So it's a bit of a trade-off. But on mobile devices in particular, especially pop-ups, and they block the entire screen. I forget the name for that is, if it's interstitial or something. But anyway, think about when you've probably gone to a site before where all of a sudden half the screen is blocked with a pop-up, and you're looking for the X to close the thing on mobile, and it's off to the side someplace. So consider other ways to draw people's attention. I mean, that's basically what a pop-up is trying to do. So there's other design layout options out there. You can search, there's plenty of articles out there too, talking about other ideas. So it's like a banner, for example. So maybe, a fixed banner or banner someplace that stands out, that really draws the person's attention instead of a pop-up. Some other ones too, and some of these may come up also if you ran some of the mobile tests that Peter had shared. So some of these will come up as flags. So elements too close together, or like buttons too small, is almost kind of the same thing. So what that means is, things that you've designed on your desktop site, when the screen shrinks, you think about if you have 3 things in a row and you're expecting somebody to click on something, or little pluses to do accordions and all that, make sure those are big enough. Think about the size of the average person's thumb, or big thumb people. You want to make it so that there's enough space in there that those elements can still be opened and manipulated properly. Similarly to anything fixed with, we talk about responsive in general. So a theme may be responsive, but maybe there's things within your site, like an old school table, one of these non-responsive tables that maybe it's an HTML table or whatever, things that just float off the screen that you can't see. Anything that's kind of fixed with that doesn't adapt to the screen size, look at those, and those are things you want to target for sizing and for fixing on a mobile device. A couple other quick ones too, and again, these probably just apply across the board. Large image or media. Where this is important is not just for the resizing piece, but as Peter had mentioned before too, is bandwidth. I mean, and a lot of the tools now, like I think it's built into Lightspeed too, you can throttle, in Inspect, there's a network tab. You can test out your website under different network conditions. So, especially for people who are not working, in the United States, if you have many visitors outside of the US, consider what conditions that they may be accessing your site. Or again, if that's an important thing for you, large images, things like that slow down the site, you want to consider resizing them just to make the speed improve. Peter touched upon this earlier too. So hover, mouse over effects, that's not going to work, with your thumb. There's no thumb over effect built into CSS. Animations, another thing, they look pretty, but a lot of times they just slow things down. They on mobile, fades and things like that don't necessarily work very well, or again, may just impact the experience. And kind of a last one that sometimes people don't think about too often, but any online forms that you have, just think about it. You probably had to fill in a form before on a phone, and that could be such a pain in the neck, a really long online form. So how do you get around that? Well, sometimes it's with any form. Again, just best practice, ask the minimal amount of information, get the rest of it later. Or there's this idea of, it's kind of called conversational forms. In some plugins like Fluent Forms, I think the pro version of that has it built in. This is the idea of taking, we've all seen this before, if you've done your taxes on TurboTax or something, it's breaking down a large chunk of inputs into multiple screens and showing people progress bars and things like that. It's just a friendlier way to gather the same amount of data without frustrating somebody having to scroll like a million different ways. So those are some things to avoid. I don't know, Peter, did I miss any other things to avoid you can think of?
One of the things that I see that happens are when things lay out over each other in ways that make content unreadable. If you have text and a background image and now you resize things and your text now disappears, ends up being sometimes an issue. You get into some really interesting things when a website gets, a lot of attention gets paid to like fancy design that then doesn't work half the time that the website's being used. So being aware of that the sizing or not showing a background image or something might work to your advantage, or doing it conditionally, which we'll talk about to some degree where when you have some time to do it. But
that's a good point. Like positioning, that was one thing too. That's probably more advanced, but things are like fixed positions. So that's not necessarily width, but on desktop, somebody may say, I want this thing to show up here. You can do that in CSS. You can make something an absolute, like a fixed position. But once you go to a mobile device or something, things suddenly don't look so great. So, all right. So let's jump into, this is, do you want me to hand it over to you?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Sure.
And while we do this, why don't we, again, let's see if we can get any questions, because it'll help us if there's something specific that we can cover. Has anybody run into issues with very specific things not working when they looked at their website on a phone?
Sue's got a good one that we'll touch upon maybe a little bit around image sizes for mobile. Do you use smaller images for mobile or let WordPress resize them? I'm not sure if you're going to show that you show that in your common adjustments.
Yeah, I don't, only because I'll tell you what, I'll be honest with you, it can be a challenge for me because there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And what's automatic, what's done by your theme when you spend time doing it. So that's an interesting question. I don't, and one thing I'm kind of curious if anyone's used some of the auto resizers that stuff gets done on the fly. I have not.
What I've done, and again, it comes down to testing and time and effort. Again, this is sometimes, I hate to say it, but sometimes if it looks good enough, I'm like, all right, if it's a background image and it is resized. So in general, WordPress itself has lazy loading images. And depending on your theme could be smart enough to say, okay, when I'm at this size, pick the smaller sized image. But there is a thing we don't cover today. Actually, I forgot about it in the advanced, like source set is an attribute where you can say for an image which one specifically to use, for different sizes. So you can have a cropped image just for mobile. Let's say it's a portrait image that fits better on mobile thing, and you can specify. Again, some themes let you do this pretty easily. Divi also has this too, where you can say, use this specific image that I've cropped myself. That's a way to do it.
Yeah, I know exactly. That is, if you're using certain page builders or premium, that's when you get into the kind of the premium tools that say, okay, here's an image and use this image for this size and this image for that size, and so on. We'll take a look to see what Kadence has, because I think there is an option there for that.
Diana has a question about suggested max file size. If you mean images, I think it's one of those, as small as you can get without sacrificing image quality.
I just read something on this, and I swear the image of, if you had to pick one image for your max size, it'd be 1200 pixels wide.
Yeah.
I like read that today, but and then there was a whole article that expanded on why and if and things like that. But for background images that don't have to be crystal clear all the time, but size well, you make compromises for things like when you have a full background image.
And I would say, Diana, go back. We actually did a pretty good, thorough presentation. I think it's on YouTube of just images in general and different techniques you can use and different image types and all that. So there's probably some good tips there.
And I'm waiting for 100% universal acceptance of WebP.
Yeah.
That image format, because man, it really does compress file images to a point where you almost don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. And then Gene has a question about responsive tables that don't work, or responsive tables that do not work on mobile. So it's not the responsive ones that don't work on mobile. It's just kind of the static ones. What I use for tables, what is it? WP data tables is one of the plugins that I use. That one's really nice about resizing things pretty well.
Yeah, I use Ninja Tables, but I use Ninja Tables Pro, and it has, like don't show certain columns on certain devices and things like that. So tables are always going to be tough because, by the nature of showing rows and columns and being able to do it, but
yeah,
just giving you that option that within the table, you might be scrolling left or right, but within that window might be all you need to have in whatever you're using for a table.
All right, that's all we had in the chat for now, Peter.
Okay, so I will grab the screen. Okay. All right, so we're here, right? Common mobile adjustments. Everybody will realize that there's a lot of overlap because we kind of keep talking about the same things, and Ray and I do some of these things separately and then combine them, and there's overlap because it's a lot of the same topics. But so what are the most common adjustments for mobile when you look at your website on a phone and you go, what do I need to fix? Font sizes. Very often is the number one thing you're going to look at and go, wow, those headings are really big, or it just doesn't look right on the phone because of font sizes. The text over image that I mentioned can be an issue. The number of columns, and this gets into, again, a lot of times we get real lucky. What's the word? Not lucky is not the word, but comfortable with the fact that our themes are doing a lot of this work for us. But you still have to check and realize that, oh, I've got 4 columns in a phone when I should just be stacking them one column another. But looking at that, you generally, your phone, you're scrolling, you're one column wide. And mobile has added, just a quick aside, something that it used to be that there was a concern about scrolling. And Ray, you probably dealt with it. Oh, everything's got to be above the fold and all. And that's all changed now, primarily because of phones and tablets. That's why now we're seeing entire websites on one page. So that's vertical is okay, but then vertical spacing, so the margins and the padding becomes important. Are you making things too slow because your margins look great on a big desktop, but on the phone now, all of a sudden you're like, okay, white space is good, but now my content is now really thin, or I have to scroll through white space because my padding and my margins are too big. And then again, that image size topic keeps coming up, but going through, looking at it, cropping, one of the things that can be a challenge sometimes, and there's no magic to this that I've found. Ray, you let me know, or Sue, or anybody else, Judith, if making sure that when you resize something, and especially if you have a background image, what you had centered on one device is now centered differently on another, and just looking at it, making sure at the very least that you're not doing something that just looks terrible, like looking for that right combination. So when you're looking at these common things and where do you fix them, and we'll look at some of the stuff, is look for the controls. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the controls built into themes and blocks. So in WordPress now, block editor, we have a preview to see in the editor, mobile and tablet. Some blocks include mobile variations in block settings, especially when you get into block packages that are kind of more advanced, like the Kadence blocks, and there's a number. I should get the whole list of various blocks. I don't like to have lots of them, so kind of focus on the ones because there's a lot of overlap and repeat. But when you go to a block collection that has spent more time than the core blocks on layout stuff, getting ones that have the mobile built into it can be very handy. Themes may include device-specific settings in the customizer. Kadence, which will show tons. In fact, everywhere in places that don't always work the same way. So this is where we're showing you stuff to help you understand where you can experiment and what to look for, then follow my rules exactly, because it varies depending on theme and even within a theme. With the premium themes and premium block packages and page builders, you get even more granular control. You get, show this on this device, don't show this on that. But you can also do that with plugins. Like there is a plugin called Block Visibility. Nick Diego put it together. It's really good. Doesn't work on 100% of the things because because of the way some of the block packages might, you rename a block or their CSS and things like that. But it's a way of saying, hey, that block doesn't even need to be on a phone, or better, if I needed to create a different version, I could use that using a block visibility plugin that will control that. So if we come back to our sites here, so when we're looking at build, and if I go to edit the page, this is one of the first things that I mentioned, where you go and you can preview it in the tablet, preview it in mobile, and then even see the difference of the editing that you're doing within those devices. But then depending on what block you're looking at, you may or may not have, again, the types of controls that gives you right in the block, a control that lets you manage things differently depending on which device it is. Now, this is when we built this one, and I'm looking to see, these are just basic, this isn't premium. So I'm going to go over and create just an example of when you have text and images and all. Like, say I'm going to put an image, and I'm going to use now, because we have the Kadence block collection here, they have, for example, advanced image. Now we're used to putting in images pretty straightforward. Here's from our little image library, and select that. And for the most part, we're dropping it in. But with the advanced image that comes in with this block, and this is an example, paragraph blocks, rows, columns, any number of kinds of blocks, depending on which block collection you have. If you go over the options, could have any number of different settings there. So for example, if I look at the border settings, say I want to create a border of it, here's what you're looking for. On a lot of pages, on a lot of blocks and things, look for those little icons that tell you this is your desktop icon. This is, I should zoom in on this. So your desktop icon, your tablet, and your mobile. And you can set those differently depending on which device that you're on, and it's going to give you that preview. So say we're looking at this on the mobile side, and for some reason on mobile, maybe I didn't want to have any border, but I'm looking at on desktop, maybe I want to have a 20 pixel border. And in this case, it's defaulting to black. But now if I look at this, and let's see if this preview works here. If I look at this on mobile, well, see, it doesn't. Oh, I know, because you got to keep this in mind too. The cascading effect of when you set something at a certain level, that you may have to go in there and then control so the default, you're set it to everything. But now if I come into border settings and then I go to my phone setting, and I might say, well, I don't want that, I want to set that now to 1 or maybe 0. So now what you've done is on a different device, that's defaulted to the 20, that's tablet, desktop. But if I go back to mobile, I should see only 1. So this is where you can look at and go, oh, well, now I'm looking at this block here, which is my my headline block. Again, I'm using the Kadence, not the WordPress core block, because Kadence has some of this stuff built in. And now I can say, well, on my mobile device, I want to look at my typography. Let's see. Can I set the size? Maybe I can't set the size in this one.
Click the show advanced. Wasn't there show advanced under typography?
There you go.
No, click on typography again, the drop down.
That's right.
And do show advanced. Yeah.
That's right. They kind of, yeah, this one they hide it. Others they put it there. So maybe I want to say that the font size for a headline on a phone is only, you know, the font size. Now this is a pixels, and Ray will get into some of the pixels and the M's and all. But now what this does is this gives you typography, show advanced. You know, on your desktop, you might want to have real big, bold, and you see this, right? I want that 60. But now when I go back to my mobile device, if I had that set to 60, I would have, it would not work. But this is where you would look on your phone, you would look on these testing tools, and you'd come back in here and say, okay, in my tool, in the block that I'm using the block collections that I have, can I change the font size? Can I change borders, margins? You know, all of those types of settings that affect how it looks on a phone, and then looking at, especially if you have a block or block collection, that gives you more control over it. Being able to set up a let's go here. I'm going to go add, and I'm going to go in my Kadence blocks. I'm going to go to row layout. And say I, you know, have a 3-column layout. And now if I put something in there, maybe I'm going to just put in, I'll do a quick headline, row 1 or column 1. I'm just going to, I like to show sometimes just different ways to get people to go, oh yeah, there's that menu where I can duplicate that. I can duplicate it, and now I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag that one into this column. I'm going to take that, I'm going to drag this one into this in the middle column. I'm going to change that to column 2. I'm going to change it to column 3. There, I've added my content pretty quickly. Now, if I preview this in mobile, they're stacked because the column understands that I don't want to make it tiny, and you'll have certain settings to pay attention there. So that's kind of neat. And now I'm going to very quickly show you on the front side, or we can go into just the customizer. So a lot of times if you're on the page, you'll go into the customizer.
Can I jump in this, Peter? Sorry, before you go to the customizer. So one thing, if you go back, if you don't mind, back to the editing page about the blocks, I think what confuses people a lot of times is, especially now in the block editor world, you may have a mix of blocks. So, you know, before we talked about themes control things. Well, now blocks have their own styling, blocks have their own properties, basically. So what gets a little confusing here is we're using Kadence. We're using at our website, we're using the Kadence theme. We're also using Kadence blocks. Both of those, they work well together, and they have these kind of mobile customizations that Peter was showing. But what can be frustrating, though, is like, Peter, if you add just a regular paragraph block, a standard WordPress paragraph block, this is where I think people are like, oh God, wait a minute, I don't see those settings anymore. It's because even though you're using the Kadence theme, depending on the block you use, this one doesn't have all those wonderful settings. What I've found, just kind of stupidly stumbled upon, is in Kadence, the Kadence blocks, that advanced heading block that you used, you don't need to use it for headings. You can use it for use it for paragraphs. And once you do that, then you get all these customizations, you know. So
This is true, and this is also where I use generate press and generate blocks, where you can have a container and then say within this container, now you have control. This
Right.
font size for this mobile within that container. So you could do all of this in CSS, right? I think you're going to talk about that a little.
Yeah.
But to be able to do that within a block or within a container that the blocks are contained in, and then say again, have these variables where you can modify them based on which device that you have. It can be really, really popular. And this is an example too of the type of thing where in some cases you're seeing that those icons, and here we've got mobile, tablet as tabs. I'm not 100% sure why, but that's the kind of thing, again, where there's no, you have to just know the concept of what you can do to be able to adapt to what you have, what you're working with, or what you may want to bring into your project. So if we go real quick to the front end, I just want to show this very, very quickly. So appearance customizer, or on the front end, so if you go to customize. With this theme, and with many of the themes that we're liking as these kind of format themes, you have a lot of control over what happens at a certain level. So if you notice in this case, at the bottom of a section, there's those icons where you can say, okay, I'm all these numbers in terms of, spacing and what's the max width I want to show, and things like that. You can end up setting them for specific devices using in the browser, and those carry into a lot of areas. If you go to, and this is where I get confused because there's a tool I think a few of us use sometimes, which is a customizer search tool, because we forget where things are. But where you can set, your controls, even colors and things like that based on a device. There's a lot of control in there. I don't want to take up too much time. Again, more conceptual. Ray, am I missing anything?
I would show that one thing that's really important back to from a Kadence standpoint is like the menus and navigation. So if you don't mind, Peter, show like the header. Like one of the reasons I really jumped onto Kadence early on was just how easy it is to create a pretty nice looking mobile menu, because a lot of times in the past you had to either have a plugin or something else to do that, or hope your theme supports it. But this one has a really great interface, the free version of Kadence of doing mobile menus.
Exactly. Remind me where the where that pops up. Right here, right? Mobile navigation.
Yeah, you got to drag that into so drag the mobile navigation over to wherever you want to put it, because it's off campus now. You're on canvas. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then you can go to gears and all that. Yeah.
One of the things that gets a little confusing again is forgetting that your different device controls are here. I haven't used this too much because I've been happy with some of the default stuff. You want to show this directly?
No, that's all right. I just want to point out to people, here's a way, let's say on mobile, you want to have a different looking icon, or you want to have, actually, I think in the general thing. So
Yeah,
in this case,
even in this
logo,
is where you edit it, right? And where we've got different stuff. But a lot of that being, you're right, where you have so much more control over things like navigation just built into the theme is pretty powerful. Yeah, I wasn't quite ready to show that, so I'd be happy to hand that over if you think it's valuable, or show it at the end if people are asking.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I just want to point that out too, just from a thing you can do within the theme. So
good. Well, you got plenty more to cover, so
why I can grab it. Yeah, let me grab it, and then we can come back to other styling.
Yeah, and maybe people will get some ideas and we can go into specific examples.
Oops, where's my? So again, yeah, good thing. So I guess the big takeaway from that is look within your theme. And as Peter said, I mean, I've used Divi. I don't know if Steve's on here still, but like the Divi theme or Elementor, it's very similar. Look for those little icons that show you what you can do. And that important takeaway, because I got burned by that before, which I'm glad you showed it, Peter, is that the idea is, especially if you're adjusting a setting for one device type, let's say for whatever reason, you're like, oh, I need to change a border on tablet, and you go,
Right.
you change that setting, beware, because that's going to cascade down to the next level. So your mobile is going to have that same setting. So that's the case of, try to be precise at the proper level, because otherwise things, you may have, your results will vary.
And the easiest thing is use your phone or use one of these tools to
Yeah.
actually look at it and see and go, oops, look what I missed. Yeah.
So this is a good segue into, so more advanced, and again, advanced, I'm saying with a small a, because they're even well beyond advanced, so we're just not going to have the time to cover. And we'll talk about some of those topics a little bit at the end. But just some other things to think about when, especially when you think about responsive. One is this idea of an absolute versus relative units. So if you've been working on websites on WordPress, you're probably very familiar with pixels, or and pixels even beyond WordPress. It's kind of a common term. But a pixel it's what's called an absolute unit, because it has a fixed size. A single pixel is measured as 1/96th of an inch. And pixels are very common because it's very easy to understand, in terms of font sizes and all that. But as Peter talked about, let's say you have all your headings by default to 40 pixels or 50 pixels, your H1s. That may not look so great on a mobile device because that pixel is fixed. It's not scaling properly. So in HTML/CSS, there are these what are called like relative units. So for a relative unit, as the name implies, the size is relative to the size of something else. So two of the ones that you've probably seen, but maybe haven't heard a lot about, are M's and Rems. And as I did some research on this, I forgot. So M is actually, I guess it goes back to old typography. It used to be measured as the size of the letter M on the old printed typography. That's where kind of the name came from. So it's a unit, though, that's based on the current font size, and I'll talk a little bit about that more later. So it's a font size based unit, but it's the current one. So it makes more sense we talk about it a little bit later. So root, or rem, is a root M. So that one is more of it's a fixed yet flexible. So it's based on the M size of what's called the root element. In this case, let's say the HTML element. So it's a little more static, and I'll talk about that in a second. Newer ones, I think that, I'm not sure exactly when these have been introduced, but VH and VW. So that's percentage of viewport height or width. So viewport, again, kind of this nebulous term, but you think about that, that's kind of a screen size, or depending on what device you're using, that may be different things, but that's the idea of what's visible. So the way this works is it's a percentage, but so 100 VH is 100% of the viewport's height. So whatever is visible, 100% of that, and VW is the width. So 100 VW is 100% of the width. So that's a scaling factor, or a scalable unit size. And then percentage, probably the easiest one to understand, is it's a percentage-based size, but it's a percentage of the parent element. And this will make more sense, I think, when I show it later. So again, depending on these units and where you set them, it does make your size more flexible for certain things, but you've got to be careful of the context of when you use these units. So let's talk about this a little bit, and then we'll show all these things in action a little bit later. So as I said, an M value, it's like a scaling factor. So the way that you write this thing is, so let's say if the body by default is 16 pixels, a 1.5 M font is 24 pixels. It's 1.5 of 16. So 2M is 32, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the way this thing works, is it's basically doubling, et cetera. But this is kind of a problematic value, because let's say inside of your code you have, I don't know, a div or a section, and you're using these 1.5M and 2M, et cetera, et cetera. Every time you increase this within a certain context, it's then being applied over and over again. So you have this cascading problem. So M's short story, M, as far as a unit goes, is it can be a little bit problematic. You do see a lot of people using them for sizing things. that's where rem is probably more of a kind of a safer unit or safer version of the M. So rem gives you more control because it's based on sort of a fixed size. So it doesn't change depending on, there's this cascading effect basically doesn't happen. And by default, if your theme doesn't set a root size of your fonts, most browsers by default to 16 pixels. So in a lot of cases, you can think of 16 pixel as that base. So 1.5 rem is equal to 24 pixels. So again, why does this make sense, or why you need this? These are scalable. These are really scalable sizes. So some situations where you may want to use these different things. And again, things vary. I don't think this one either there even is necessarily a best practice for it because it's situational. But some places where you may want to use these relative units are things like font sizes. Like I said, rem is good for that. Padding and margin. So let's say you want to increase something, you don't want to use pixels. You can say it's scaled on a certain rem value. VH or VW. Again, if you want to have an image or something else scaled to fit an entire viewport width, rather than saying 100 or 1028 pixels because you want it full screen. You don't know if 1028 pixels is full screen or 1920 or whatever. You can say 100 VW or 100 VH, etc. And then percentages, again, for padding, margin, things like that, a percentage is a more scalable way because you think about when the screen shrinks down, a 5% of whatever container this padding is in will shrink down proportionally. It's not a fixed font size. So again, play with these units. So I'll show you some examples in a second. But the key thing is always test. And try to stick to the same ones. Like I said, there really is, even looking up some research for this too, there best practices, it depends on who you talk to. I prefer percentage a lot of times, like I said, for widths and padding. But then other times I'll use rem. VH or VW, I don't use quite that often. I tend to use them more for images. If I want something full screen or something to fit within full height, that's the one scenario where I tend to use VH or VW. Peter, you got any thoughts on any of these relative units or ones that you may?
Yeah, other than the fact that as you're talking about it, and I see every once in a while I'll go out and watch a video, there's some expert CSS people out there, and this even just scratches the surface of where the cascading style sheets is now with what and how you control what you see. Yeah. It really is amazing. And the flip side is that is I don't want to say I'm embarrassed because I think I'm in the majority, but I'm still, I still use the pixels and the points far more than I probably should.
Well, I think the tools like what you showed too makes it a bit easier. But where this, I think one of the disadvantages of setting things in the theme or at the block level, like what Peter had showed, it's valid. I mean, I've done it many times for adjustments. The problem is when you're working on a big site with lots of pages, and let's say you want to make adjustments across the board, you don't want to go into every page and set block by block by block by block. That's where some of these things, if you set things to, either relative units or set them through CSS and some of the ways I'll show in a second, it scales better. It's just, it's kind of a quicker way to do things. But you're right, pixels and those kind of fixed units, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just these sometimes, a lot of people aren't aware of them. They see them like, what are they? I think there's good situations to try them out. Again, testing is the big thing. Always test multiple devices. Real quick, because I do want to show some demos. So the other magic, back to responsive. Responsive itself is like I said, it's more of a techniques like this to make a site adapt. And really the magic, I'd say, behind most of it is these things called CSS media queries. So again, CSS, if you don't know, that's cascading style sheets. That's the styling of your page. So everything you see, like colors, etc., like that, that's usually defined in CSS rules. But media queries allow you to apply different styles depending on the device type that's displaying a page. So if you go to the actual spec, the different media types that are supported by these queries are things like print, screen, speech, et cetera, et cetera. So they're thinking of different devices in the future. Like think about smart TVs. So a smart TV is different than, or our, I don't want to say it here because most you may have them, but our smart devices that are always listening, things like that, although they don't necessarily have CSS, but the idea is devices are changing over time. If you don't, I'll show you later, if you don't specify the device type in your query, it just defaults to all. But you can also, in these media queries, you can test screen orientation. So as you know, if you're using a smartphone, things look very different, landscape versus portrait. So you can, if you want to apply stylings differently, you can test screen orientation. There's many different types of media queries you can do, but one of the probably most common ones for applying styles is min or max width. So again, think about that. That's the minimum or maximum width of the screen. And based on that, you can tell, is it a small device, is it a medium, big device, et cetera, and you want to do things slightly differently. So let me show you just a quick example of that. So some common screen sizes, and this varies too. This is not exhaustive by any means, but like a mobile device, a mobile screen is, 360 by 720-ish size. So that's width by height. An iPhone 10, a bit larger, 375 by 812, and then Pixel 2, et cetera, et cetera. So laptops could be 1366 to anything, depending on the size of it. So your theme itself, when Peter was showing those different previews, so Kadence, when you did a preview of a tablet versus a mobile versus a desktop, they've decided, the theme designer has decided what is a average tablet size, or what is an average phone or average desktop. But be aware that it's not necessarily iPhone or Samsung, whatever. They've picked one of these, and all of those stylings that you're applying are just applying at a certain breakpoint. So you may still need some more fine-grained styling that goes beyond what your theme provides for you. So what is a media query? We'll look at this in action in a second. But this is really what it looks like. So if you're not really familiar with CSS, normally your CSS code would look something like this. So this is a selector, and here's a style. We're applying the style display none. So this is hiding something. So this could be a button. So let's say you had a button, display none, it disappears. So in this case, the way that the media query works is this part, the kind of bluish, I guess, I'm kind of bad with colors. The bluish part here, this is that sentence, or this is the first part of the media query. So it starts off a little bit different than regular CSS. It says at media only screen. So this is saying just for screen device types, not for screen readers, etc. So accessibility, which is one of our future topics somebody asked about in the chat. This will come up probably, hopefully, if we ever get to that topic. And a maximum width of 600 pixels. So this is saying that anything up to 600 pixels, I want to do this set of CSS. It doesn't have to be, in this case, it's one statement. This could be multiple statements of CSS in here. So for example, let's say we're hiding something if it's 600 pixels wide or less. That's what all this is really doing. So the key thing here is if you're writing this code, make sure that your CSS, here's your CSS, it's wrapped inside of this media query. And a key thing too, and I'll show this example too, Peter kind of showed this visually when you're playing around with those different device types. Styles, as the name says, cascading style sheets, it's in the name. Styles cascade. So where you put this media query, you have to make sure that it's in the proper place so that it isn't overridden by something else. So if you're trying to say, I'm trying to hide this button on mobile devices, why is it not hiding? You probably have another rule someplace where it's overriding that. So this needs to be in the proper cascade of your rules. And I'll show you an example of that in a second. All right, so some of this will make more sense as I go into the demo. So luckily, I was hoping, Peter, you wouldn't fix we were looking at this section, which I know we created before. I'm going to just show some quick example, not really too in-depth of, as we look at this 2-column section, one of the things that becomes apparent when we look at this through mobile, and I'll show it just through Hover for a second, is that section doesn't look so great on mobile. So what's happening here, if folks remember when we built it, is this is, it's a 2-column, so the columns are stacking fine. But what we did, and I think it was me, I'll take the blame, is I removed padding and spacing, and I changed the sizing a bit, because on desktop I wanted this thing to look tight. So back to our thing of white space. On a desktop, this looks pretty nice. I think there's low gutter in here. I've squished this down, basically. That's a technical term. I squished it down so it looks good on a desktop device. Well, the problem is when you go to a mobile device, it's no longer 2 columns. So maybe that's the real problem. It looked good as 2 columns. Once it becomes 1 column, it doesn't look so great. So I'm going to do a couple quick media query things to fix this a little bit. And there's multiple ways that you can do this, just to show you an example of what media queries can do. So I'm going to do it kind of the simplest way is and I've already kind of prepped this, so we don't have to waste a lot of time on it, is in the customizer, depending on your theme, most themes, these WordPress themes, especially modern ones, should allow you to add in additional CSS. So if you don't want to create a child theme, again, we have a whole thing on child themes we did before. But let's say you just have a couple of minor adjustments. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to change this and adjust it for mobile versus desktop. So here's the actual code for, if you have to go back to watch when we built this. But what's happening is this column, I added a CSS class previously when we built it called, I called it something different, but it's called mobile column. What it's doing is it's shrinking this down to 80%. And just to show you that that's true, let's say I switch it to 50%. So basically it's taking a column and it's making it smaller and smaller. And I wanted that on desktop because I want this to look tighter. I don't want it to be, bleeding over too much. But let's say that I only want that now. In hindsight, I'm like, ooh, that doesn't look good on desktop. So how can I make it so that that is only going to happen on desktop? I'm sorry, yeah, but not on mobile devices. So I'll show you first the minimum width property. So again, you think about media queries. You can test for, I want something at least this size or bigger. So in this case, if I'm saying I want to test for something at least 768 pixels wide or bigger, that's probably going to be, a tablet or a desktop or whatever, something beyond that. So if I do that, this is one way to solve this, is let's say I'm just moving my CSS styling into here. So again, this thing is the wrapper. So it's saying if the media size is 768 pixels or greater, or I'm sorry, if it's minimum 768, then do this thing, then apply this style. So I'll just publish that for a second so you can see. So now if we look at this, now it's changed it. So now we're at the point where, okay, now this is back to probably 100%, or maybe there's a little bit of padding. So now it's not squished all the way over to the left. So that's better. It's still not great. I still want to do some styling on this, but just to show you again. So and on a desktop, it still looks the same as it did before. So on the desktop, it's still 80%. And if I want to just adjust it on desktop, I can say 50% or whatever. So the rule is still working for desktop. Now, the second part I want to do, just to show you quickly another style, is now let's say I want to do something specifically for mobile. So in this case, I happen to pick, so anything where its maximum width is 411 pixels. And I'm not sure where I got 411 from. Maybe I got it from, I might have got it from one of this list of phones. Yeah, I got a Pixel 2 on it, but I kind of picked that. So again, that's the thing. You need kind of an average range. But let's say I want to do something only for mobile. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to add some padding around this. So I'll show you the different padding things we talked about. So let's say in this case, this is too tight. I want a little bit of breathing room here. So I want to put some padding around all sides of this this column, or actually now it's a row at this point. But so what I can say is, again, inside of this media query, I'm going to say that's my class, so mobile. And I'm going to say so what I want to change is padding. So we'll add padding of 5%. So right now you don't see anything happening here. what I think I probably can do, well, let me just publish it. I'll do it the lazy way first. The lazy way is I publish it, then I go back to my screen, I refresh it, and now I should have 5% padding around, and I do. So that's what 5% pad. That looks pretty good. I probably would keep 5%.
Good, man.
Yeah, and you can see these are all different sizes. So this is a 360, that's a 411. 5% doesn't look too bad on these different devices. And you can increase this to 7 or 8. So what is, this is probably good. So what is 5% of? It's 5% of, in this case, whatever this column is wrapped in. And I won't show all the HTML, but think about this is inside of, you know, when we were building this page, we're building rows and columns. So this is now, it's a column which has a particular size. So it's 5% of that. That's basically what it's doing is padding. I think the other place I could have seen this is if I had gone here, I think I could have seen my preview there too. Yeah, I guess I could have. Yeah, it's this view, I don't think looks as good. Maybe it's just because the other one looks prettier, but this one doesn't look as good. But you know, it's quick and dirty. So let's say I want to adjust it from 5% to 8% or whatever, 10% padding. So I'm giving it a little bit more breathing room. That looks okay, I think too. And now if I go back here, what does 10% look like? It looks like that. So again, this, when we talk responsive, this is really what mostly what's going on is this idea of media queries. So your theme is either doing this for you behind the scenes, you know, it's saying based on this device type, based on the size, do certain things a certain way. But when you need to get more fine-grained, certainly the easier way to do it is what Peter showed of, if your theme supports it visually, you can go in there, you can change things at, you know, a particular level, but there still may be times where you need to do it through CSS, or maybe somebody put a rule in here that you're not aware of. Go check those additional settings, look for a media query someplace that maybe is overriding what you're trying to do. You know, maybe there's something left in from another developer, or, you know, exactly from a child theme that you're using, etc. Just one quick thing I'll show to you in terms of that cascading effect again, and this will probably be an ugly example of this, but let's show. So let's say this is the idea of put things at the right place. So I think if I do this, that'll work it out. Sorry. Is it going to change my heading? Oh, font. Sorry, font. I'm trying to, maybe I should do an H, because that's an H2 maybe. Maybe how about the text? Is the text blue? Or, I'm sorry, color blue. What I'm trying to show is, okay, so
There you go.
all right, color blue. So let's say in mobile, I wanted to change this. I wanted the color to be green. Color. So in this case, when I look at a mobile, that should now be green. Hey, that's great. But what my earlier point too was around cascading and having these at the right level. If this code, if this line of code is just below it, it's going to be blue no matter what, because this is overriding. You think about the way this is being read is each of these styles is being applied on top of the previous one. So when you're doing things like, and this applies for anything for cascading styles, but especially for mobile, you need to make sure that your mobile specific rules are below your more general ones. So the more specific ones are at the bottom, more general ones at the top. So again, this is something that can burn people if they're looking at saying, I've got this rule here, why isn't it working? Well, something else is overriding it. Okay.
For those who use the see something weird happening too, again, where the developer tools, the inspector in Chrome or Firefox, or can kind of show you like, oh, this was loaded, and then there's a line through it that says because it's overwritten by this. Again, probably for many of our those who participate in this, kind of just know that this is what's going on behind the scenes when you automatically do it through your theme and through the blocks and all. When you're picking things, ultimately somewhere CSS is being created. So
right. And I'll show just real quick the other way I could have done that. So those were doing it through CSS rules, but back to the other way to do that relative sizing we talked about. The nice thing, again, not all themes support this, but like Kadence being a friendlier theme, I should say, if we look at our column, oh, you know, this is this one. Oh, this is a WordPress column. Is that's not going to show up? But here's another way we really talk about stacking on mobile. You can turn that off too. So if you turn off stacking mobile, it's going to be 2 columns there instead. So this, someone else, I forgot who mentioned in the chat too. One thing that's very confusing right now is we're still in a bit of the wild west of blocks, where different blocks are doing different things. They're doing them all differently. Like Peter had showed, one is doing them as tabs, one's doing them as something else. So it can be a bit confusing in terms of where do I find these settings and does block support that or not. But what I want to just show real quick, maybe it's down here, is that idea of padding and margin. You know, so by default, you may not know this, but you know, again, by default, this is saying 25 pixels, which is fine. But in Kadence, at least, when you click on this, here's where those other units come up. So that's how you can set them differently. So you can set it by percentage instead of a fixed unit. So again, depends on your theme, depends on your block. Worst comes to worst, if you're, you know, don't be afraid of CSS. I know it looks like a bit of gibberish, but a lot of times I think you can find examples on the internet. We'll send some links out afterwards too of resources where you can find you know, how to create a media query. They're really not that tough. In the past, they used to look a lot more complicated because people would put things in there also about browser types, you know, all these crazy things. These days, in general, you don't need all that. So again, it's much simpler than it used to be. So that was, let me just check. I think that was most of the advanced stuff that I wanted to show. So just maybe let's just wrapping up some kind of final thoughts. So things that we didn't touch upon, like I said, this topic could have extended well beyond. In fact, you know, there's things like AMP, accelerated mobile pages, or mobile first design. I'd say both of these are also kind of philosophies in a sense, especially mobile first design. So just, you know, real quickly, what that means is some people really propose that you first design for a mobile device and then scale everything up to other types of devices. So the way you would do that is kind of those media queries that I showed. You would always start with the minimum. So, you know, I expect something to be minimum this and apply these styles, and then anything different than you is the exception as opposed to the norm. I don't know anyone here, has anyone really designed mobile first? I mean, personally, I still go by default. I still go by desktop and then adjust things afterwards. And then AMP, again, is its own separate topic. AMP is accelerated mobile pages. That was something where Google was pushing that and supposedly rewarding sites through their rankings in terms of if you were following all these things that they put in place to be, you know, AMP, not really certified, but I guess AMP compliant. I've kind of heard that die down a bit. I think there's been a lot of pushback from developers and other people saying, first off, some of these AMP sites don't really look that good. And a lot of people are like, is it really worth the effort to do that? So I personally haven't done a lot with AMP. And again, I'm not sure how much it's even really, you know, being pushed by Google anymore.
Yeah, years ago I installed it once and never used it. After that, it was, you know, and now the smartphones have more and more screen. Broadband is faster and faster. So again, everything adjusts and modifies. So I can show, let me show something while maybe with some questions. I thought is kind of an interesting take. I just wanted to show a project that I've been working on, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Sound good? Okay. So this, not this, but this is a website that I did. And I'm only saying it from because it relates to our topic at hand here. This is meant for people who are using their phone, but this is the desktop version. But if you go to, so here's the menu up here and all, but you can see how it's all right. It's pretty basic, like straight. But when you look at this on a phone, now is designed so that the menu locks to the bottom and acts like an app, but it's still a WordPress site. But this is now where you're using conditional blocks that say, on a phone, use icons in the menu at the bottom of the screen and lock it there, kind of thing. So I felt this was a recent project that kind of felt apropos to what we're talking about in terms of when you can get to a level of control over how things work, you know, on a phone. I had my menu actually go to a separate screen so I can have a lot more control over it and all, but it goes to show how much control that you can get over you know, with mobile devices, and really start thinking about how you might want to do something specific for a mobile device. But yeah, the mobile first kind of design sometimes, and I see some things trim back a little bit, but I'll go to certain websites and everything is gigantic on the screen. Everything is like in one weird thin column, and that's because it's designed for the phone first, and they didn't really change much for the desktop version. So the desktop version looks overwhelmingly weird to me versus, you know, a magazine style where, you know, 3 columns of my stories and things like that. So yeah, so the awareness.
No, that was neat too, that site that you showed, like you said, because that's the thing. And it takes time and thinking and planning to make it, you know, make something look different. And that, again, I think the big takeaway from this is at least test your sites on mobile, and hopefully your theme provides a lot of that flexibility and customization, so you don't have to, you know, write a bunch of CSS to do it or not. Again, I think there's a lot of stuff built into modern WordPress themes these days, and I'm hoping, back to the chat conversation I had about blocks, I'm hoping over time some of this becomes just standard built into WordPress core. I mean, I think things have gotten better. WordPress core, the block editor, is much better than when it launched in what, 2018-ish. But you know, these very basic things I think drive people crazy sometimes. Like you know, you want to use the standard paragraph block, but if it doesn't do these kind of things, you're like, oh, you know, I get frustrated with that. So hopefully over time this stuff becomes easier for all of us. But you know, again, the number of devices are not changing, like smartwatches, all these other things. You know, like, who would have ever thought people would be browsing the web on the different things people are doing today? So, well, I didn't see any other questions, kind of wrap up questions in the chat that we see. Let's see. Menu super page now. Cool. Okay. Well, I think, I mean, again, where we're going next on this is we're still using this site, our animal shelter site. We probably want to go back and do some of the other adjustment things we've done in the past, like performance, security. We'll touch upon all those things later too. But we're definitely looking for ideas from everyone else too. So if you liked this topic, this was more of a general one, but hopefully applies to everyone's websites. If there's other things like that that you think of, you know, reach out to Peter or myself, either through Meetup or through the Facebook group. We're definitely looking for ideas, even if it's things we've done in the past. We're happy to go back and revisit things and update them. So we appreciate your input.
Ray,
and
can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Sue.
Okay, when you optimize pages for mobile, do you do it page by page, or do you go back when you're all done?
It depends. I would say for me, I try to, if I'm building a site from scratch, I in general go back afterwards, but not too long afterwards, because I find a lot of times I'm just trying to set the tone for the design, and then sometimes stopping to go back and change every page to be mobile. I'll tell the client, for me, because again, I'm building sites for other people, I happen to tell the client, don't check it yet on mobile. You know, that's usually part of my project plan to go and do that. Because sometimes if I'm doing mobile too soon, then I find myself just making changes, like, you know, they want to go and switch something. Let's say they switch an image and I've wasted all this time doing mobile styling. I'd rather kind of wait till things are more settled.
That makes sense. I was just curious.
Yeah, I think I'm the same for the same reason, where, you know, I no longer do things like wireframes or anything like that. It's just faster for me to do it actually as a website, fully interactive. But if I know that they're looking at a desktop, things will swap in and out and all, and then okay, now, you know, now we're locking it down, and now I'll make sure that mobile works. And I'm lucky that most of the tools that I have already get me, you know, good way of the way there to begin with. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Thanks.
Well, thanks everyone for joining. Once again, we hope you got a lot out of this. We'll send out the links as well as a link to the recording of this presentation. It'll probably be available sometime tomorrow. So again, thanks everyone for joining. We hope to see you again at our next meetup next month. Take care.
bye.
Bye, everyone.